In the silent heart of winter, some wounds never truly heal. They merely wait buried beneath snow and solitude. Deep in Montana's mountains where stars hang like frozen tears and forests keep ancient secrets, a silver stallion appears at the edge of darkness. Wild, untamed. Yet his eyes hold a wisdom older than the mountains themselves. What draws a wild creature to a broken soul? What invisible thread connects horse and human across the chasm of grief? For 5 years, Eliza Morgan has hidden from the world, fleeing memories of the day everything shattered. But on this night, as bitter winds howl like the ghosts of regret, a reckoning approaches. Some say horses can see into human hearts. Some believe they carry messages between worlds, between the living and those we've lost. When the silver horse appears in the storm, will Eliza find the courage to follow, or will she remain forever trapped in the prison of her past? The wilderness holds no mercy for the weak, but sometimes within its harshest embrace, we find the path back to ourselves. The scream tore through the air, sharp and desperate. "Theo!" Eliza Morgan lunged forward, arms outstretched, but the distance between them stretched like taffy in a nightmare. Her brother's body arced through the air in terrible slow motion, his hand still reaching for the little boy he'd pushed to safety. The massive chestnut horse reared again, eyes wild with panic hooves, slashing the air where Theo had stood just seconds before. The sickening crack as Theo's head hit the training arena's fence post echoed through the indoor riding center. Blood blossomed against the weathered wood. Children screamed. Parents rushed forward. The horse bolted to the far side of the arena, still snorting and wild-eyed. But Eliza saw only her brother, his 17-year-old frame suddenly small and broken on the ground, his eyes finding hers one last time before the light in them dimmed forever. "Theo, please," she whispered, gathering him into her arms, feeling warmth leaving his body even as staff called frantically for an ambulance. "Please don't go." But he was already gone. Eliza jolted awake in darkness, her brother's name dying on her lips. Cold sweat plastered her nightshirt to her skin, despite the freezing temperature in the cabin. Outside, the Montana winter howled, driving snow against the windows with such force it sounded like tiny bullets. 5 years. 5 years since Theo died, and still he haunted her dreams. Eliza pushed back the heavy quilts and swung her legs over the side of the bed, toes curling against the icy wooden floor. The cabin's fire had died to embers, casting weak orange light across the sparse room. Her breath clouded in front of her face. Moving with the efficiency of routine, she added logs to the wood stove, poking at the embers until flames licked upward again. As warmth slowly returned to the single-room cabin, Eliza moved to the window, rubbing away frost with her sleeve, to peer into the darkness. The storm was worsening. Trees bent under the weight of snow, and wind the forest around her cabin transformed into a writhing mass of white and black. But something else caught her eye. A shape at the edge of the tree line, too large to be a deer, too still to be a figment of her imagination. A horse, silver gray against the snow, nearly invisible, except for the movement of its mane in the wind. Eliza blinked hard, certain her eyes were playing tricks. No horse could survive in this wilderness, especially not in such a storm. Yet there it stood, watching the cabin with unnatural stillness, steam rising from its nostrils. "Impossible," she whispered, pressing her palm against the cold glass. The horse's ears twitched forward as if it had heard her through the howling wind and solid walls. For a moment they locked eyes across the distance, Eliza and this phantom horse, before it turned and melted into the darkness of the forest. Eliza stood frozen, heart hammering against her ribs. In 5 years of isolation, she had seen elk, moose, even the occasional wolf, but never a horse. Never the animal that haunted her nightmares. Her hand trembled as she reached for the kettle. She needed tea, something to calm her nerves, to convince herself she'd imagined the horse. Just another ghost conjured by her guilt-ridden mind. As water heated on the wood stove, Eliza moved to her small desk where her current drawing lay abandoned. A half-finished sketch of a running horse, its lines elegant but incomplete, missing the spark of life. Like all her drawings since Theo's death, she couldn't bring herself to finish it. Around the desk, dozens of similar sketches were pinned to the walls, all beautiful, all incomplete. The radio crackled to life with the press of a button, the only voice besides her own that ever filled the cabin. "Worst storm in 20 years continues to batter western Montana," announced the weatherman, his voice fighting through static. Residents are advised to remain indoors. Power outages reported throughout Ravalli County. Temperatures expected to drop to 15 below zero tonight, with another 2 feet of snow by morning. Folks, this is a life-threatening situation. Stay home, stay warm. Eliza switched it off, pouring hot water over a mixture of chamomile and valerian root. The fragrant steam rose to her face as she carried the mug to the window again, searching the tree line. Nothing, just swirling snow and darkness. She sighed, turning to survey her sanctuary. The cabin was small but sturdy. One room with a wood stove at its heart, a narrow bed tucked against the wall, a desk beneath the window, and a small kitchen area with an old propane stove. Shelves lined with books, dried herbs, and canned food. A bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. No electricity except what her solar panels could provide on clear days, which meant the dead of winter often left her with just lamplight and a generator for emergencies. 15 miles from the nearest town of Pinewood, 5 miles from the nearest neighbor. Exactly as she wanted it. Her gaze fell to the photograph lying face down on the shelf, the only family photo she kept. She hadn't looked at it in months, couldn't bear to see their faces. Her parents, herself, and Theo all smiling at a birthday celebration just weeks before the accident. A stack of unopened letters from her parents sat beside it, their desperate attempts to reach her over the years. The tea warmed her hands as she moved to her journal, bound in worn leather and opened to a fresh page. December 15th. The dream again, always the same, always too late to save him. She paused, pen hovering over the paper, then added, "Saw something strange tonight. A horse at the edge of the forest, silver gray like a ghost. Probably just exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. The storm is getting worse. Supply run tomorrow if the roads are passable. Can't put it off any longer." She closed the journal and stared into the flames. The fear that had gripped her upon seeing the horse slowly ebbed, replaced by the familiar hollow ache that had been her constant companion for 5 years. Outside, the wind screamed like a wounded animal, rattling the cabin's bones. But even above the storm's fury, Eliza could have sworn she heard it, the distant sound of hoofbeats moving through the snow-laden forest. Morning arrived with eerie silence. The storm had paused, though dark clouds hung low, promising more to come. Eliza dressed in layers, thermal underwear, flannel shirt, thick jeans, 2 pairs of socks, then pulled on her heaviest sweater before adding her parka gloves and boots. The world outside had transformed overnight. Snow had drifted against the cabin, reaching halfway up the windows on the north side. Her old Ford pickup was nearly buried, only the top of the cab visible under its white blanket. Shoveling took an hour, the exertion warming her, despite the biting cold. Finally, the truck was freed, the path to the narrow road cleared. Eliza tossed the shovel in the back, climbed into the cab, and turned the key. The engine protested, coughing and sputtering in the frigid air, before reluctantly roaring to life. As she navigated the treacherous mountain road toward Pinewood, Eliza's eyes continually drifted to the forest edges, searching for any sign of the silver horse. Ridiculous, she told herself. It was a hallucination, a figment of her imagination born from her recurring nightmares. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched as she drove, as if something followed her progress through the trees. Pinewood appeared after an hour of careful driving, a small cluster of buildings nestled in a valley. Population 832, according to the weathered sign, though Eliza suspected it was fewer now. The kind of town young people left and rarely returned to, where everyone knew everyone's business and strangers were noticed. Eliza parked outside Running Bear General Store, the most comprehensive shop in town. Unlike the chain supermarkets in larger cities, Joseph Running Bear's store sold everything from groceries to hardware, clothing to medicine. More importantly, Joseph never pushed conversation on her, respecting her desire for silence in a way the other townsfolk couldn't seem to manage. The store's bell jingled as she entered, warmth enveloping her, along with the familiar scent of herbs, coffee, and wood smoke. Joseph stood behind the counter, his weathered face creasing into a smile at the sight of her. At 75, the Blackfeet elder moved with the measured grace of someone entirely comfortable in his skin, his long silver hair braided down his back. "Miss Morgan," he greeted, using the formalities she preferred. Cutting it close with this storm. Radio says it's going to get worse, she replied, grabbing a shopping basket. Need to stock up. Joseph nodded, watching as she moved methodically through the aisles, selecting flour, coffee, canned goods, batteries, and other essentials. She could feel his eyes on her, more thoughtful than usual. Something on your mind, Joseph? She finally asked, placing her selections on the counter. He studied her face for a long moment. You look tired, troubled. Eliza shrugged. Bad dreams, nothing new. Hector. Joseph began ringing up her purchases. They say when you dream of the dead, they're trying to tell you something. A chill ran down Eliza's spine that had nothing to do with the cold outside. I don't believe in that kind of thing. No, his dark eyes held hers. What about spirit animals, then? You believe in those? Eliza stiffened. Why would you ask me that? Instead of answering, Joseph reached beneath the counter and produced a small leather pouch. Been seeing strange things lately. Men in the mountains who don't belong, helicopters flying low over the ridges. He pushed the pouch toward her. And the horses are restless. Horses, the word caught in her throat. The wild herd that roams the high country. Been there for generations. Smaller each year. He tapped the pouch. Herbs, for protection. Sage, sweetgrass, cedar, for your spirit. Eliza started to refuse, then stopped. Something in Joseph's expression made her reach for the pouch instead. I don't understand, she said quietly. You will. He finished bagging her groceries. Be careful on your way home, Miss Morgan. Keep your eyes open. The wind brings change. The cryptic warning followed her out of the store and into the truck. As she loaded her supplies, movement across the street caught her attention. A black SUV with tinted windows, engine running a logo on the door she couldn't quite make out. Two men in expensive-looking winter gear stood beside it, watching her with undisguised interest. Uncomfortable, Eliza quickly finished loading her truck and climbed into the cab. As she pulled away from the store, she glanced in her rearview mirror to see the SUV pulling out behind her. The coincidence might have meant nothing, but Joseph's warnings echoed in her mind. Keep your eyes open. She took a turn toward the highway instead of the mountain road, watching as the SUV followed. Two more turns confirmed her suspicion. They were following her. Heart-pounding, Eliza made a sudden decision, jerking the wheel to take an unmarked road that led into the forest. A logging route she knew well from her explorations. The SUV hesitated at the turn, then followed. Eliza pressed the accelerator, pushing the old truck faster than was safe on the snow-covered road. Around a bend, she quickly pulled off onto a narrow track, hidden by overhanging pines, cut the engine, and ducked down. Seconds later, the SUV barreled past her hiding spot, continuing up the logging road. Eliza waited 10 minutes, pulse thundering in her ears, before cautiously returning to the main road and taking a different route toward her cabin. As she climbed higher into the mountains, the sky darkened ominously. The radio warned the second wave of the storm was approaching, fast, stronger than the first. Eliza pushed the truck harder, desperate to reach home before getting caught in whiteout conditions. She was navigating a particularly narrow stretch of road when she saw it. Movement in the trees ahead. She slowed, squinting through the windshield as snow began to fall again. There, struggling in a small clearing just off the road, was the silver horse from the night before. Its leg was caught in something, and it thrashed in panic, sending up plumes of snow around its powerful body. Eliza's first instinct was to drive past. Whatever was happening to the horse wasn't her concern. She had to get home before the storm hit in full force, but she found herself pulling over instead, engine idling, as she stared at the distressed animal. Even from this distance, she could see it was magnificent. Muscular and proud despite its predicament, its silver-gray coat almost luminescent against the snow. And it was injured, a trap of some kind clamped around its back leg. This is insane, she muttered, turning off the engine. The rational part of her brain screamed to leave to get to safety. Approaching a panicked horse, especially for someone with her history, was beyond foolish. Yet she found herself reaching for the rope she always kept in her truck, a remnant of her former life she couldn't quite discard despite never touching a horse since Theo's death. As she stepped out into the intensifying snowfall, the horse's head jerked up, dark eyes locking onto her. It whinnied, a sound of fear and warning, and renewed its struggle against the trap. Easy, Eliza called, her voice rusty from disuse. Easy there. The word felt foreign on her tongue after so many years. How many times had she said that exact phrase in the training ring, calming nervous horses and anxious children alike, before everything fell apart? The horse watched her approach, nostrils flaring, muscles tensed for flight. Now that she was closer, Eliza could see it was a stallion, young, but fully grown, with intelligent eyes and a powerful build. Not a domestic horse that had escaped. This was a wild creature born to the mountains and valleys. The trap that held him was cruel. A toothed metal snare, the kind used by poachers, not legitimate trappers. Blood stained the snow around his injured leg, though the wound didn't appear severe yet. Eliza stopped several yards away, the distance safe, but still close enough to see the horse's ribs expanding with each panicked breath. Snow swirled between them, the wind picking up strength. I'm going to help you, she said softly, knowing the words meant nothing to the horse, but hoping her tone might soothe him. But you have to stay still. Images of Theo flashed through her mind, his broken body, the wild-eyed horse that had killed him. Her hands began to shake, not from cold, but from the sudden rush of fear that washed over her. I can't do this. But the stallion had stopped struggling, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that seemed almost human. In that moment of connection, Eliza made her decision. She closed her eyes briefly, focusing on her breathing the way she'd taught countless children over the years. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow and steady. When she opened her eyes again, determination had replaced fear. She moved forward with careful steps, speaking in a low, even voice. I'm going to release that trap, and you're going to stay very still. Then we'll both go our separate ways. Deal. The horse snorted, pawing at the ground with his free foreleg. Eliza approached from the side, never making direct eye contact, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. The trap was a nasty piece of work, its teeth digging into the horse's lower leg just above the hoof. Designed to hold, not kill immediately, the poacher would return later to collect their prize. Who would do this to you? She murmured, kneeling in the snow. The stallion trembled but remained surprisingly still as she examined the mechanism. Years of handling difficult horses came back to her muscle memory, taking over where conscious thought failed. This is going to hurt, she warned, positioning her hands on the trap's spring. But it'll be quick. With a swift, practiced motion, she disengaged the trap. The horse jerked as the pressure released, nearly trampling her as he scrambled backward. Eliza fell into the snow, heart pounding, as she waited for hooves to come crashing down on her. Instead, the stallion steadied himself a few yards away, favoring his injured leg but otherwise alert. Blood trickled from the wound, but the damage appeared superficial. The trap hadn't been in place long enough to do lasting harm. For a long moment, horse and woman regarded each other across the snowy clearing. The wind howled around them, temperature dropping as the storm intensified. Go on, Eliza said, finally getting to her feet. You're free. The stallion tossed his head mane flying in the wind, then turned and trotted into the forest. At the edge of the trees, he paused, looking back at her one last time, before disappearing into the thickening snowfall. Eliza stood alone in the clearing, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Something had shifted inside her. A door long sealed had cracked open just a fraction. The wail of the wind snapped her back to reality. The storm was upon her, snow now falling so heavily she could barely see the road. She needed to get home fast. Hurrying back to her truck, she turned the key in the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. No, 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 she muttered, trying again. This time the engine didn't even turn over. After 5 years of faithful service in extreme conditions, her trusty Ford had finally given up. Eliza slammed her hands against the steering wheel in frustration. She was at least 8 miles from her cabin in a rapidly worsening blizzard, with temperatures plummeting toward deadly. Her emergency kit contained basic supplies, but nothing that would sustain her through what was coming. She had no choice. She would have to walk. Gathering her emergency pack, extra gloves, hat, and the groceries she could carry, Eliza set out into the storm. The wind cut through her layers like a knife, snow stinging her exposed cheeks and forehead. She kept the road to her right, using the tree line as a guide, since the road itself was rapidly disappearing under fresh snow. 1 hour into her trek, Eliza knew she was in trouble. The cold had seeped into her bones, her movements becoming sluggish as her body temperature dropped. The landmarks she relied on were obscured by the whiteout conditions, making it impossible to be certain she was still heading in the right direction. After 2 hours, she couldn't feel her toes or fingertips. Her thoughts grew muddled, a dangerous sign of hypothermia setting in. Still, she pushed forward one painful step after another. Keep moving, she told herself, the words slurred. Just keep moving. But her legs finally betrayed her, buckling beneath her weight. Eliza collapsed into the snow, the cold seeping through her clothes. She should get up, she knew that, but her body refused to respond. As consciousness began to fade, Eliza thought she saw a figure in the swirling snow, a boy with Theo's smile beckoning to her. I'm sorry, she whispered, tears freezing on her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Theo. The sound came so faintly at first that she thought it was the wind playing tricks, the soft nicker of a horse somewhere close by. Then came the warm puff of breath against her cold face, the gentle nudge of a velvety nose against her gloved hand. Eliza forced her eyes open. Through the curtain of snow, a pair of dark, intelligent eyes stared back at her. The silver stallion had returned, steam rising from his nostrils in the freezing air. You came back, she murmured, wondering if this was a hallucination, the last firing of neurons in a dying brain. The stallion nudged her again, more insistently this time, then pawed at the ground beside her. With tremendous effort, Eliza pushed herself to her knees, then to her feet, swaying dangerously. The horse remained still, watching her with that unsettling intelligence. I need to get home, she told the horse, knowing how absurd it was to be talking to a wild animal as if it could understand. But I don't think I can make it. The stallion stepped closer, turning his body sideways to her, and lowered his head. Eliza stared in disbelief. Years of training horses told her what he was offering, but her mind couldn't accept it. This was a wild stallion never touched by human hands until today. Yet he was offering her his back as clearly as if he'd spoken. This isn't possible, she whispered. The horse nickered softly, impatiently, as if to say, decide now or die here. With the last of her strength, Eliza grabbed a handful of the stallion's mane and pulled herself onto his back. She had no saddle, no bridle, nothing to hold on to except his mane and the warmth of his body beneath her. Please, she murmured, leaning forward to wrap her arms around his neck. Please help me. The stallion needed no further encouragement. With a powerful surge, he began moving through the snow, sure-footed despite the treacherous conditions. Eliza clung to him, her face pressed against his warm neck, consciousness fading in and out as they traveled. She couldn't have said how long they rode. Time lost all meaning in the white void of the blizzard. Occasionally, she roused enough to register they were climbing, moving higher into the mountains rather than toward her cabin, but she was too weak to protest. Finally, the stallion slowed, picking his way carefully down a steep slope. Through half-frozen eyelashes, Eliza glimpsed a small structure ahead. Not her cabin, but an old hunter's shelter tucked into the side of the mountain, nearly invisible beneath its blanket of snow. The horse stopped at the door, nickering softly. With the last of her strength, Eliza slid from his back and staggered to the door, forcing it open with numb hands. The interior was dark and cold but dry. As her eyes adjusted, Eliza made out the shape of a small wood stove, a narrow cot, and, most surprisingly, a person lying motionless on the floor. Hello, she called, her voice barely audible over the howling wind outside. No response. Summoning what little energy she had left, Eliza moved toward the still form kneeling beside what she now saw was a man. Blood matted his dark hair, where his head had struck the corner of the wooden table, and his skin was pale with cold, but a weak pulse fluttered beneath her fingertips when she checked his neck. Hey, she said more loudly, tapping his face. Can you hear me? The man remained unconscious. Behind her, the door creaked. Eliza turned to see the silver stallion watching from the doorway, snow gathering on his back. Thank you, she told him, meaning it more deeply than she could express. The horse nickered softly, then backed away, allowing the door to swing closed. Alone with the unconscious stranger, Eliza forced herself to move. Hypothermia threatened them both, and if they didn't get warm soon, neither would survive the night. Her wilderness training took over, pushing aside exhaustion and pain. First, she checked the stranger for additional injuries beyond the head wound, finding none obvious except extreme cold exposure. Next, she turned her attention to the wood stove, thanking whatever deity might be listening when she found dry kindling and logs stacked nearby along with matches. Her fingers fumbled with the matches dropping two before she managed to strike the third. The kindling caught flames licking upward, and Eliza fed the fire carefully until it blazed steadily in the small stove. Heat began to fill the one-room shelter, slow but vital. Eliza dragged the unconscious man closer to the stove, removing his wet outer layers and covering him with a dusty blanket she found on the cot. Only then did she tend to herself, stripping off her snow-soaked parka and boots rubbing feeling back into her extremities as painfully as pins and needles returned. She inventoried the shelter's meager supplies, some canned food, a pot for melting snow, a first aid kit with basic supplies. As warmth returned to her body and mind, Eliza took a proper look at the man she'd found. He appeared to be in his late 30s with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' growth of beard. His clothes were expensive, the kind designed for serious outdoorsmen, and a leather satchel lay nearby, its contents spilled across the floor. Curiosity piqued Eliza gathered the scattered papers. Most were technical documents, environmental impact studies, geological surveys, construction permits, all bearing the letterhead of Westland Development Corp. Detailed maps of the surrounding mountains had been marked with various notations highlighting watersheds and terrain features. But what made Eliza's blood run cold was a photograph that had fallen from the satchel. A photograph of herself and Theo, taken during a therapy session years ago. Theo was laughing his arm around a small boy on horseback, while Eliza stood beside them, smiling up at the child. Her hands trembled as she stared at the image. Who was this man, and why did he have a picture of her and her dead brother? A soft groan drew her attention back to the stranger. His eyelids fluttered, then opened, revealing hazel eyes clouded with pain and confusion. Where? He rasped, trying to sit up. Don't move, Eliza said firmly, pushing him back down. You hit your head. Possible concussion. The man blinked several times, focusing on her face. Recognition dawned in his eyes. Eliza Morgan, he whispered. Eliza's spine stiffened. She held up the photograph, her voice hard despite her exhaustion. Who are you, and why do you have this? The man closed his eyes, briefly wincing. Jackson Hayes. I'm a wildlife ecologist, studying the wild horses. That doesn't answer my question. Eliza held the photo closer to his face. Why do you have a picture of me and my brother? Jackson swallowed visibly. It's part of my research. Research on what my brother is dead. Has been for 5 years. Pain flashed across Jackson's face. Whether from his injury or her words, Eliza couldn't tell. I can explain, he said weakly, but not now. Please. Water. Eliza hesitated, suspicion warring with basic human decency. Finally, she nodded, moving to the small window where snow had drifted against the glass. She scooped some into the pot and placed it on the stove to melt. As she worked, she kept glancing at Jackson, who had fallen silent, watching her with those intelligent hazel eyes. Outside, the storm continued to rage, shaking the small shelter with its fury. Somewhere in that storm was the silver stallion that had saved her life. Shadowwind, she thought, suddenly the name coming to her unbidden. It suited him, mysterious and powerful appearing and disappearing like a ghost in the blizzard. Jackson accepted the cup of melted snow with shaking hands. Thank you, he said, his voice stronger. How did you find me? Eliza settled on the edge of the cot, keeping distance between them. I didn't. The horse did. His eyes widened. The stallion's shadow. The name so similar to her own thoughts startled her. You know him. I've been tracking him for 2 years. Jackson took a sip of water. He's the lead stallion of the last wild herd in these mountains. Incredibly intelligent. Used to be a domestic horse before he escaped during a ranch foreclosure. Became wild, gathered a herd. Eliza processed this information, remembering how the stallion had offered his back to her in the snowstorm. Behavior no truly wild horse would exhibit. Why were you unconscious? She asked, changing the subject. Jackson's expression darkened. Was following some men, poachers. They're hunting the herd. He touched the wound on his head gingerly. Must have slipped on the ice, hit my head on the way down. Last thing I remember. These poachers, Eliza said slowly, they wouldn't happen to drive black SUVs, would they? Jackson's gaze sharpened. You've seen them. In town, they followed me for a while. He attempted to sit up again more successfully this time. Not good. If they're watching you, they know about your connection. I have no connection to anything, Eliza said firmly. I live alone. I mind my business. Yet Shadow brought you here. Jackson's eyes held hers. That's not coincidence, Eliza. The use of her first name sent a jolt through her. It's Miss Morgan to you, and you still haven't explained why you have a photograph of my brother. Jackson sighed, leaning back against the wall. The truth is complicated, and you probably won't believe me. Try me. Before he could answer, a sound outside the shelter made them both freeze. The crunch of snow under Boots' voices carried on the wind. They found us, Jackson whispered, fear evident in his eyes. Eliza moved quickly to the window, peering through a crack in the frost-covered glass. Two figures in heavy winter gear struggled through the snow toward the shelter rifles slung over their shoulders. 2 men, she reported quietly. Armed. Jackson attempted to stand but swayed dangerously. We need to leave, now. You can barely walk and there's a blizzard out there, Eliza hissed. We'd freeze to death in minutes. Better than what they'll do to us. Jackson's voice was grim. Those aren't ordinary poachers. They work for Westland Development. They'll kill us both and make it look like an accident. Eliza's mind raced. The shelter had no back exit, nowhere to hide except the root cellar, she whispered, spotting the small trapdoor in the floor. Quick. Together they pulled up the trapdoor, revealing a small storage space beneath the floorboards. Without hesitation, Eliza helped Jackson down into the darkness, then slipped in beside him, pulling the door closed just as Boots stomped onto the shelter's porch. In the cramped, musty space beneath the floor, Eliza and Jackson huddled together, barely breathing as the door above them crashed open. Someone's been here, a gruff voice announced. Fire's still burning. Check outside, ordered another. They can't have gone far in this storm. Footsteps moved across the floorboards directly above their heads. Eliza felt Jackson's arm tighten around her shoulders, pulling her closer as dust sifted down from the boards. Hayes' satchel, the first voice said, but the documents are gone. Boss won't like that. A pause. No sign of them outside. This storm's getting worse. They'll die out there anyway. Let's grab what we can and get back to base. More footsteps, the sound of items being collected. Then the door slammed shut and silence fell, broken only by the howling wind and the rapid beating of Eliza's heart against her ribs. They waited in darkness, minutes stretching like hours, before Eliza finally pushed at the trap door. It lifted easily, revealing the shelter now empty of intruders. They took my supplies, Jackson said weakly as they climbed out. And yours, it looks like. Eliza surveyed the shelter. The fire still burned in the stove, but their packs were gone along with the food she'd carried from her truck. We're trapped, she said quietly. No supplies, a blizzard outside, and men with guns who want us dead. Jackson sank onto the cot, face pale. I'm sorry. I never meant to drag you into this. Eliza turned to him, anger flaring. Then explain, now. Why do you have my photograph? What is this really about? Before Jackson could answer, a soft nicker came from outside. Eliza moved to the window to see Shadow Wind standing in the swirling snow as if waiting. He's still here, she whispered. He won't leave. Jackson said, his voice faint. Not while we need him. Eliza looked from the silver stallion to the injured man, feeling the weight of unspoken secrets between them. Whatever game Jackson Hayes was playing, whatever danger they were in, one thing was clear. Shadow Wind had saved her life today, had led her to this shelter for a reason. Rest, sir, she told Jackson, moving to stoke the fire. The storm won't let up until morning at the earliest. We're not going anywhere tonight. Jackson's eyes were already closing, exhaustion and injury pulling him toward unconsciousness again. The photograph, he murmured. It's not what you think. I'm trying to help. His voice trailed off as he slipped into sleep, leaving Eliza alone with her questions and the howling wind. Outside, Shadow Wind pawed at the snow, once then turned and disappeared into the white void, a silver ghost melting into the storm. Eliza wrapped herself in the remaining blanket and settled on the floor near the stove, her back against the wall, eyes fixed on the sleeping stranger who somehow knew her name and carried her past in his satchel. Tomorrow would bring answers one way or another. For now they had survived thanks to a silver horse that shouldn't exist and a connection she couldn't begin to understand. In the dancing firelight, Eliza found herself humming softly, a lullaby she used to sing to Theo when they were children, a melody she hadn't allowed herself to remember in 5 long years. "What are you trying to tell me, Theo?" she whispered to the empty air. "What am I supposed to do?" Only the wind answered, screaming around the corners of the shelter, like a soul in torment, as the longest night of Eliza's life stretched before her. Dawn broke reluctantly over the mountains, pale light seeping through the frost-covered windows of the hunter's shelter. Eliza hadn't slept. Her body ached from the cold floor, but she'd refused to lower her guard, watching Jackson Hayes throughout the night, studying the face of the stranger, who somehow carried a piece of her past. The storm had finally relented, leaving behind an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional crack of snow-laden branches and the soft breathing of the injured man on the cot. Eliza rose stiffly, adding the last of the firewood to the stove. The shelter had grown cold during the night, their breath visible in the morning air. Without supplies, they wouldn't last another day here. Jackson stirred, wincing as consciousness brought awareness of his injuries. He blinked up at her eyes, clearer than they had been the previous night. "You're still here," he murmured, sounding surprised. "Where else would I go?" Eliza replied, her voice neutral. "There's a blizzard outside and men with guns looking for us." Jackson pushed himself up on his elbows, grimacing with the effort. The wound on his head had stopped bleeding, but a nasty bruise spread across his temple, disappearing into his hairline. "How's your head?" Eliza asked, professional concern overriding her suspicion. "Like someone's driving railroad spikes into my skull." He attempted a smile that came out as more of a grimace. "But I'll live. Thanks to you." "Thanks to Shadow Wind," she corrected, moving to the window. "I'd have died out there if not for him." Outside, the world had transformed into a crystalline wonderland. Sunlight glinted off pristine snow unbroken, except for a single set of hoof prints leading away from the shelter. No sign of the men who had threatened them the night before. "We need to talk about that photograph," Eliza said, turning back to face Jackson. "And about why men with guns are hunting you." Jackson sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "It's a long story. We're not going anywhere until the snow melts enough to travel safely. I'd say we have time." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "You deserve the truth." He gestured to the space beside him on the cot. "Please sit. This isn't a conversation to have standing." Eliza hesitated, then perched on the far end of the cot, maintaining distance between them. "I told you I'm a wildlife ecologist," Jackson began. "That's true. For the past 2 years, I've been studying the last wild horse herd in these mountains. But before that, I worked for Westland Development Corporation as their environmental assessment specialist." "The company on those documents," Eliza said. "Yes, Westland is owned by Robert Crawford, a real estate developer who specializes in luxury resorts. 3 years ago, Crawford began buying up land around Pinewood for what he called an eco-resort, a high-end wilderness retreat for the ultra-wealthy." Jackson paused, a shadow passing over his face. "At the time, I believed in the project. Crawford talked about sustainable development, minimal environmental impact. My job was to make sure the resort met all environmental regulations." "What changed?" Eliza asked, noting the bitterness in his voice. "Everything changed when my wife Emma and our daughter Lily were killed in a car accident." The words came out flat, stripped of emotion by repeated telling. They were driving back from visiting her parents in Missoula. Black ice on the highway. They never stood a chance. "I'm sorry," Eliza said quietly, recognizing the hollow ache in his eyes, the same one she saw in her mirror every day. Jackson acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "After they died, I fell apart. Couldn't work, couldn't function. Crawford gave me a leave of absence, was surprisingly supportive. When I finally returned to work 6 months later, the plans for the resort had changed dramatically." He leaned forward, intensity replacing the sorrow in his expression. "The original design was for a small, low-impact facility. The new plans called for a massive complex, golf course, spa, helipads, luxury condos, and the centerpiece was a dam that would create an artificial lake, drowning an entire valley." "The valley where the wild horses live," Eliza guessed. "Exactly. But it's more than that. That watershed feeds several smaller towns downstream. The dam would divert water to the resort, leaving the local communities with severe shortages during dry seasons. Jackson's voice grew stronger as he continued. I raised concerns pointed out the ecological damage and the impact on local water supplies. Crawford told me to falsify the environmental impact reports to make the problems disappear on paper. And you refused. I resigned instead. But before I left, I copied documents proving what they were planning. His eyes met hers. That's when the threats started. Crawford's security chief, Victor Harlan, made it clear what would happen if I went public with what I knew. Eliza frowned, processing his story. It explained the documents, but not the photograph. What does any of this have to do with my brother? She asked the question that had burned in her mind all night. Jackson's expression softened. After I left Westland, I began documenting the wild horse herd, gathering evidence of their ecological and cultural importance to protect the valley. During my research, I discovered Crawford had previously funded your equine therapy program. Yes, Eliza confirmed the memory, bringing a fresh wave of pain. Westland was our biggest donor. After Theo died, they pulled their funding. The program collapsed without it. Shuna, now did you ever wonder why Crawford withdrew support so quickly, without even a token gesture of sympathy? Eliza shrugged. A child died during one of our sessions. Bad publicity. Or perhaps he needed your program to fail, Jackson suggested quietly. Perhaps Theo's death was convenient. The implication hung in the air between them. Eliza stood abruptly, anger flashing in her eyes. That's a serious accusation. I'm not saying Crawford was responsible, Jackson clarified quickly, but his company had just acquired land rights that bordered the property where your therapy center operated. Land that became much more valuable after your center closed. Eliza paced the small confines of the shelter, mind racing. You think Theo's death wasn't an accident? I think it deserves investigation. The horse that panicked during that session, was there any explanation for its behavior? No. Eliza admitted, the memory crystal clear, despite the years. Monarch was our gentlest therapy horse. He'd never shown fear or aggression, not once in 7 years. That day he just snapped, for no reason. Jackson nodded as if her answer confirmed something. The photograph was given to me by Maya Crawford, Robert's daughter. She was a volunteer at your therapy center. Eliza froze. Maya, tall girl, dark hair, about 19 then. That's her. She gave me the photograph because she thinks her father may be involved in something criminal. She's been helping me gather evidence against Westland. His own daughter, Eliza, found this harder to believe than the rest. Maya and her father have a complicated relationship, Jackson explained. She's an environmental science major, now passionate about conservation. She believes the dam project will destroy not just the valley, but her father's legacy. She wants to stop him before it's too late. Eliza returned to the window, needing space to process everything Jackson had told her. Outside, the brilliant morning sunlight had dimmed as clouds gathered again on the horizon. The respite from the storm would be brief. Even if I believed all this, she said finally, what do you expect me to do? I left that life behind 5 years ago. Help me document the wild horse herd, Jackson said simply. Your expertise with horses combined with my ecological data could provide enough evidence to force a new environmental review of the dam project. Eliza laughed bitterly. I haven't touched a horse since Theo died, until yesterday when your silver stallion decided to play hero. Shadow chose you, Jackson said, his voice softening. That means something. It means he's smart enough to recognize a human who could free him from a trap. No, Jackson shook his head firmly. Wild horses don't seek out humans for help, especially not ones who've suffered trauma. They sense fear, avoid it. Shadow not only approached you, he trusted you enough to carry you through a blizzard. That's extraordinary. Eliza had no answer for that. The connection she'd felt with the silver stallion had been immediate and inexplicable, as if he somehow understood her pain. We should check outside, she said, changing the subject. See if there's any sign of those men returning. Jackson nodded, accepting her need to step back from the emotional conversation. With her help, he rose unsteadily to his feet, testing his balance. Better than yesterday, he observed. But I won't be winning any races. Together, they opened the shelter door, squinting against the brilliant reflection of sunlight on snow. The air was bitterly cold, but still the storm's fury temporarily exhausted. No tracks except shadows, Eliza noted, examining the undisturbed snow around the shelter. But that doesn't mean they won't be back. We need to reach my cabin, Jackson said. It's about 3 miles east of here. I have a satellite phone there, supplies. Eliza hesitated. My cabin is probably closer, just down the mountain to the south. Too predictable. They'll check there first if they're looking for us. Before Eliza could respond, a soft nicker drew their attention to the tree line. Shadow Wind stood there, his silver coat gleaming in the morning light, watching them with those intelligent dark eyes. He came back, Eliza whispered, a strange warmth spreading through her chest despite the cold. He's been keeping watch, Jackson said, smiling slightly, protecting his investment. The stallion pawed at the snow, then turned and took several steps into the forest, before looking back at them expectantly. I think he wants us to follow him, Jackson observed. Can you walk that far? Eliza asked, eyeing his unsteady stance. I'll manage. Better than staying here without supplies. Eliza made a quick decision. Wait here. She returned to the shelter, tearing a strip from the blanket to make a crude bandage for Jackson's head wound. She also fashioned a walking stick from a piece of broken chair leg, then gathered the few useful items remaining in the shelter. A small knife, a tin cup, and a box of matches. When she returned outside, Jackson had moved closer to Shadow Wind, who stood patiently at the edge of the clearing, steam rising from his nostrils in the cold air. Ready? She asked, handing Jackson the walking stick. He nodded, accepting both the stick and her support as they began trudging through the knee-deep snow. Shadow Wind moved ahead of them, his powerful body cutting a path they could follow, occasionally looking back as if to ensure they were keeping up. They walked in silence for nearly an hour, the exertion warming their bodies despite the bitter cold. Jackson leaned heavily on the walking stick, his face pale with effort, but determined. Eliza found herself impressed by his resilience, though she remained wary of his intentions. The forest around them was eerily beautiful. Pines bowed under blankets of snow icicles, hanging like crystal chandeliers from bare branches, the occasional burst of red from winterberry bushes. In different circumstances, Eliza might have appreciated the pristine wilderness surrounding them. Tell me about your work with the horses, Jackson said, suddenly breaking the silence. Before the accident, Eliza stiffened. Why? Professional curiosity, and conversation helps distract from the pain. She considered refusing, but the memories rose unbidden. We worked primarily with children who had experienced trauma or had developmental challenges. Horses are uniquely therapeutic. They respond to emotions' energy. They don't judge. Like Theo in the photograph, was he one of your patients? No. A smile touched her lips despite herself. Theo was my assistant, even though he was only 17. He had a gift with the horses better than mine sometimes. The children adored him. You must miss him very much. The simple acknowledgement of her loss caught Eliza off guard. Most people avoided mentioning Theo, uncomfortable with her grief. Every day, she admitted quietly. He was more than my brother. After our parents divorced, we raised each other in many ways. He was pure light. Shadow Wind had stopped, a head, ears pricked forward, listening to something beyond human hearing. His entire body tensed, a statue carved from living silver. Something's wrong, Jackson whispered instinctively, lowering his voice. Eliza nodded, scanning the forest around them. Shadow Wind turned his head, dark eyes locking with hers, then deliberately moved off the path they'd been following, angling deeper into the trees. He wants us to change direction, she murmured. They followed the stallion, moving as quietly as possible through the deep snow. Within minutes, Eliza heard what had alerted Shadow. The distant sound of voices, the mechanical growl of snowmobiles approaching from the east. Harlan's men, Jackson breathed. They're heading toward my cabin. Shadow Wind led them through increasingly dense forest, the terrain growing steeper as they climbed higher into the mountains. Eliza supported Jackson as best she could, but the difficult path was taking its toll. His breathing grew labored, face shiny with sweat despite the cold. We need to rest, she insisted after another half hour of grueling ascent. Jackson shook his head stubbornly. Not safe yet, but his body betrayed him. His legs buckled and he would have fallen if Eliza hadn't caught him, easing him down to sit against a tree trunk. Just 5 minutes, he gasped, eyes closing with exhaustion. Shadow Wind circled back to them, snorting softly. He pawed at the ground, impatient to continue, but Eliza stood her ground. He needs rest, she told the stallion firmly, as if speaking to any horse under her care. We'll follow you, but not until he can walk again. To her surprise, Shadow Wind seemed to understand. He lowered his head, blowing warm breath against Jackson's face, then moved a short distance away to stand guard, ears continuously moving alert to any threat. Eliza knelt beside Jackson, checking his pulse, rapid but strong. The wound on his head hadn't reopened, but exhaustion and cold had drained what little strength he'd recovered overnight. Here, she said, scooping up clean snow into the tin cup. It's not much, but it'll help with dehydration. Jackson accepted the cup with trembling hands. Thanks. After drinking, he studied her face. You're good at this, taking care of others. Eliza looked away. Old habits. Why did you really leave after the accident? He asked quietly. You could have continued the therapy program somewhere else. Your work was important. The question struck a nerve. I told you, I haven't touched a horse since Theo died. That doesn't answer my question. Eliza stood pacing a small circle in the snow. What do you want me to say, that I couldn't face the families who trusted me? That every time I looked at a horse, I saw my brother dying all over again? That I was drowning in guilt and couldn't bear one more sympathetic look or empty platitude? The words poured out of her, hot and painful after years of silence. I left because I failed. I was supposed to protect him, to keep everyone safe. One moment of inattention, and my brother died in my arms. Jackson watched her, compassion in his eyes, but no pity. Sounds like you've been punishing yourself for 5 years. I deserve punishment. Did you? Or did you deserve healing? He gestured to Shadow Wind, who stood watching them. Maybe that's why he found you. Not to remind you of what you lost, but what you still have to give. Eliza shook her head, unwilling to consider his words. We should keep moving. Can you stand? Jackson nodded, accepting her deflection and her offered hand. Together they continued, following Shadow Wind, who led them ever higher into the mountains, away from the sounds of pursuit. By mid-afternoon, the clouds had thickened again, threatening more snow. The temperature dropped steadily as daylight began to fade. Eliza knew they needed shelter soon, or risked freezing during the coming night. Shadow Wind seemed to understand their predicament. He increased his pace, looking back frequently to ensure they followed. Finally, the trees thinned, revealing a hidden valley nestled between towering peaks. Eliza gasped at the sight before them. In the valley below, a herd of about 30 wild horses moved across the snow-covered ground, their coats ranging from dark bay to palomino to pinto. They grazed where the wind had blown snow away from patches of winter grass, steam rising from their bodies in the cold air. They heard Jackson breathe, leaning heavily against a tree. He brought us to his family. Shadow Wind nickered softly, pawing the ground, as if pleased by their reaction. Then he trotted down the slope toward the herd, which raised their heads in greeting as their lead stallion returned. It's beautiful, Eliza whispered, watching as Shadow Wind moved among the other horses, touching noses, checking on each member of his herd. This is what Crawford wants to destroy, Jackson said, his voice hardening. This valley would be underwater if the dam is built. These horses would be relocated or euthanized. Euthanized? Eliza turned to him, horrified. They can't do that. Wild horses have limited protection. If they're deemed excess, or if their habitat is approved for development, they can be removed. Jackson's expression was grim. That's why the documentation is so important. If we can prove this herd has historical and ecological significance, we might save them. As they watched, Shadow Wind separated from the herd and began climbing back toward them, accompanied by a beautiful bay mare. The two horses moved with synchronized grace, clearly bonded. That's Nova, Jackson explained. Shadow's mate. She was born wild, unlike him. The horses approached cautiously, Nova hanging back, while Shadow Wind came directly to Eliza, nudging her shoulder in greeting. Hello again, she said softly, hesitantly, raising her hand to his neck. The stallion stood perfectly still, allowing her touch. The simple contact, her fingers against his warm coat, sent a jolt through Eliza. How long had it been since she touched a horse? 5 years of avoiding even the sight of them. And now here she was, hand resting on the neck of a wild stallion, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. There's a cave system on the far side of the valley, Jackson said, interrupting her reverie. The herd shelters there during storms. It should be safe for us tonight. Shadow Wind seemed to understand Jackson's words. He stepped back from Eliza and turned, leading the way down into the valley. Nova followed occasionally, looking back at the humans with curious eyes. The other horses watched their approach warily, young foals ducking behind their mother's stallions, moving protectively to the perimeter. But none fled, held in place by Shadow Wind's calm demeanor. They trust him completely. Eliza observed professional assessment overriding her personal conflict. And he trusts us, so they accept our presence. It took me months to get this close to them, Jackson admitted. You've managed it in a day. Shadow made the choice, not me. They skirted the edge of the herd, following the two lead horses toward a rocky outcropping on the far side of the valley. As they drew closer, Eliza saw the dark openings of several caves set into the stone face. The largest cave entrance was tall enough for the horses to enter comfortably. Inside, the temperature was significantly warmer than the open air, protected from wind and insulated by the earth. The floor was smooth, worn down by generations of hooves. The herd has used these caves for at least a century, Jackson explained as they settled inside. Maybe longer. Joseph Running Bear's people have stories about spirit horses living in these mountains since before European settlers arrived. Joseph, Eliza said suddenly, remembering the pouch he'd given her. She reached into her pocket, relieved to find it still there. He gave me this before the storm, said it was for protection. She opened the small leather bag, releasing the fragrant scent of dried herbs, sage, sweetgrass, cedar. Traditional medicines. Jackson identified them. Healing herbs. Joseph knows more about these mountains than anyone. If he gave you those, he was trying to help. He mentioned seeing strange men in the mountains, helicopters flying low over the ridges, and he said the horses were restless. Eliza looked toward the cave entrance, where Shadow Wind stood watching the darkening sky. He must have known something was wrong. Joseph has been fighting Crawford's development plans from the beginning. As an elder of the Blackfeet Nation, he's argued that the valley has cultural significance. Jackson's voice held deep respect. Crawford's lawyers have dismissed his claims, but Joseph hasn't backed down. Outside, snow began to fall again as twilight descended on the valley. The wild horses moved closer to the caves, seeking shelter from the coming storm. Eliza watched them with a professional eye, noting their good condition despite the harsh winter, the clear hierarchy of the herd, the attentive care Shadow Wind showed to each member. We should try to get some rest, Jackson suggested, settling back against the cave wall. Tomorrow we need to reach a civilization, contact Maya. Eliza nodded, though sleep seemed unlikely in their current circumstances. She arranged herself against the opposite wall, maintaining distance between them despite the growing cold. As darkness filled the cave, the soft sounds of the horses moving outside became a soothing backdrop. Eliza found her eyelids growing heavy, the exhaustion of 2 days' survival finally catching up to her. I never asked, she murmured, fighting sleep. How you found Shadow originally? Jackson's voice came softly through the darkness. I didn't find him. He found me. What do you mean? After Emma and Lily died, I was in a dark place. One night I drove up into the mountains, not planning to come back down. His voice wavered slightly. I was sitting there with a bottle of whiskey and my service weapon ready to end it all when Shadow appeared out of nowhere. Just stood there watching me. Eliza held her breath, the parallel to her own experience unmistakable. He stayed with me all night, Jackson continued. Wouldn't leave no matter how I tried to shoo him away. By morning, something had changed. I couldn't go through with it, not with those intelligent eyes watching me. It felt like he was saying I still had work to do. So you started studying the herd instead. Yes, documenting them became my reason to keep going. Then I discovered Crawford's plans for the dam, and the purpose became clearer. The simple honesty of his story resonated with Eliza more than she wanted to admit. She'd found her own way to keep going after Theo's death. Isolation, routine, the rhythmic simplicity of survival in the wilderness. But unlike Jackson, she hadn't found a purpose beyond mere existence. Sleep claimed her before she could respond, her dreams filled with running horses and Theo's laughing face. Morning arrived with heavy clouds and fresh snow. Eliza woke to find Jackson already upstanding at the cave entrance, in conversation with Joseph Running Bear. The elderly Blackfeet man nodded solemnly as Jackson spoke, his long, silver braid contrasting sharply with his dark jacket. "Joseph," Eliza called, pushing herself to her feet. "How did you find us?" The old man turned, his weathered face breaking into a gentle smile. "The horses told me." He gestured towards Shadowwind, who stood nearby. "This one has been watching over you." "Joseph hiked in before dawn," Jackson explained. "He's been searching for us since the storm broke." "Bad men are looking for you," Joseph said without preamble. "They came to the store asking questions, showing your pictures." "Crawford's security team," Jackson confirmed grimly. "They offered money for information." Joseph's expression darkened. "When that didn't work, they made threats." "You shouldn't have put yourself at risk," Eliza said, concerned. Joseph dismissed her worry with a wave of his hand. "These mountains have protected my people for generations. They will not betray me to men who seek to wound them." He reached into his pack and pulled out several wrapped bundles. "Food, warm clothes, medicine." He handed them to Eliza. "And news." "What news?" Jackson asked, accepting a thermos of what smelled like hot coffee. "The Crawford girl is looking for you. Says it's urgent." Joseph's eyes were serious. "She waits at my store. Says her father has moved up the timeline. The dam project begins in 3 days." 3 days? Jackson straightened, alarm clear on his face. "That's impossible. The environmental impact statements haven't been approved. The public comment period isn't over." "Money talks louder than law," Joseph said simply. "Crawford has friends in high places." Eliza unwrapped a bundle to find warm bread and dried meat. Her stomach growled in response to the first food she'd seen in nearly 2 days. "We need to get to Pinewood," Jackson said, already formulating plans. "Contact the Environmental Protection Agency, the press." "The roads are still blocked from the storm," Joseph informed them. "But I know paths through the mountains. I can guide you." As they ate, Joseph shared what he knew. Crawford had accelerated the dam project, bringing in heavy equipment and security personnel under the guise of preliminary surveys. Maya had discovered her father's company had falsified environmental reports and bribed officials to fast-track approvals. "And the horse killings?" Jackson asked. "Any word on who's responsible?" Joseph's face hardened. "Harlan's men. They are eliminating the wild herd a few at a time, making it appear like natural deaths or predation. With no herd to protect, the valley loses its conservation status." Eliza listened in growing horror. "The systematic destruction of the wild horses, the corruption, the environmental damage, all to build a playground for the wealthy. We found evidence," she spoke up. "Documents in Jackson's satchel. Stolen by Harlan's men when they searched the shelter," Jackson said bitterly. "But I have copies at my research cabin. If we can reach it—" "Too dangerous," Joseph cut him off. "They watch your cabin. Maya says Crawford knows you have evidence that could stop the project." "Then we need another plan." Jackson turned to Eliza. "You're an expert on horses. Your testimony about the herd's behavior, its unique characteristics, could help establish their protection status?" Eliza hesitated. "I haven't practiced in 5 years. My credentials are expired." "Your reputation remains," Joseph said quietly. People remember Eliza Morgan and her healing horses. The weight of expectation pressed on Eliza's shoulders. For 5 years, she'd hidden from the world, from responsibility, from the very animals that had once been her life's work. Now she was being asked to step back into that role, to speak for creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. "I need time to think," she said finally. Joseph nodded, understanding in his ancient eyes. "The storm returns soon. We must leave within the hour if we hope to reach Pinewood by nightfall." As Joseph and Jackson discussed the best route down the mountain, Eliza walked to the cave entrance. Outside, the wild herd grazed peacefully, unaware that their existence was threatened. Shadowwind raised his head as she appeared, regarding her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to see straight through her defenses. "What do you want from me?" she whispered to the silver stallion. In response, Shadowwind approached, stopping just before her. With deliberate gentleness, he lowered his head and pressed his forehead against her chest, directly over her heart. The gesture, so trusting, so vulnerable from a wild creature, brought unexpected tears to Eliza's eyes. For a moment they stood connected, woman and horse, in a silence more eloquent than words. Then Shadow Wind stepped back, tossed his head, and rejoined his herd. The message couldn't have been clearer if he'd spoken aloud. Trust your heart. When Eliza returned to the cave, her decision was made. I'll help, she told Jackson and Joseph. Whatever it takes to protect the herd. Joseph smiled, a knowing look in his eyes. The horses chose well. They prepared to leave, bundling up against the cold in the extra clothes Joseph had brought. As they exited the cave, Shadow Wind and Nova stood waiting, as if aware of their plans. They want to come with us, Jackson said, surprised. No, Eliza corrected, understanding flowing between her and the silver stallion. They want to lead us, show us a safer path. Joseph nodded in agreement. The horses know these mountains better than any map. We would be wise to follow. With Shadow Wind and Nova guiding them, they began the treacherous descent from the hidden valley. The stallion chose paths invisible to human eyes, routes that avoided steep drops and dangerous ice. Nova stayed close to Eliza, occasionally brushing against her, as if offering support. They had traveled for perhaps 2 hours when Shadow Wind suddenly froze, ears pricked forward in alarm. The stallion snorted, pawing the ground nervously. Something's wrong, Eliza whispered instinctively, interpreting the horse's behavior. Joseph signaled for silence, listening intently. Then Eliza heard it too, the distant whine of snowmobile engines. Harlan's men, Jackson hissed. They must have found the herd's valley. We need to hide, Joseph said, scanning their surroundings. But there was nowhere to conceal themselves on the exposed mountainside. The snowmobile's sound grew louder, approaching rapidly from below. Shadow Wind nickered urgently, moving off their path toward what appeared to be a sheer drop. Nova followed without hesitation. They want us to go that way, Eliza said, pointing. That's a cliff, Jackson objected. Joseph was already moving, following the horses. Trust them. With no better options, they hurried after Joseph. What had appeared to be a cliff from a distance revealed itself as a narrow ledge winding down the mountainside, concealed by an overhanging rock formation. The path was barely wide enough for a person to traverse sideways, but the horses navigated it with surprising agility. They had just disappeared under the overhang when the first snowmobile crested the ridge above. Through a gap in the rocks, Eliza glimpsed 3 machines, each carrying armed men scanning the landscape. They're tracking us, Jackson whispered. Shadow Wind pressed himself against the rock wall, standing unnaturally still. Nova did the same, and the humans followed suit, barely breathing, as the snowmobiles paused directly above their hiding place. Tracks end here, a gruff voice announced. They couldn't have vanished. Maybe they doubled back, suggested another. Spread out. Check the ridgeline. Harlan wants haze found today. The engines revved as the snowmobiles separated, moving in different directions. Only when the sound had faded did Eliza release her breath. That was too close, she murmured. They will return, Joseph predicted grimly. We must reach Pinewood before they find our trail again. They continued along the hidden path, which eventually widened enough for more comfortable travel. Shadow Wind and Nova remained vigilant, constantly scanning for danger as they led the way down the mountain. By mid-afternoon, they reached lower elevations, where the snow was less deep and the forest thicker. Here, Joseph took the lead, guiding them through ancient stands of pine and aspen that concealed their passage. There's something I need to tell you, Jackson said quietly to Eliza as they followed Joseph. Something I haven't mentioned about Maya. Eliza glanced at him, noting the tension in his expression. What about her? She was there the day your brother died. She saw what happened. Eliza stopped abruptly. What? Maya was volunteering that day. She was helping with a younger child when Monarch panicked. Jackson's eyes held hers steadily. She says she saw someone near the arena fence just before it happened. Someone who shouldn't have been there. Who? Eliza demanded, her heart pounding. Victor Harlan. The name hit Eliza like a physical blow. Crawford's security chief. The man hunting us now. Jackson nodded grimly. Maya believes Harlan did something to spook the horse deliberately. She was only 19, afraid to speak up at the time. When she finally told her father years later, he dismissed her, said she was mistaken. Why would Harlan want to sabotage my program? Eliza's mind raced, trying to process this revelation. Your therapy center was on land adjacent to property Crawford wanted to develop. With your center thriving, the area was protected under therapeutic use zoning. After the accident, when you abandoned the property, the zoning restriction was lifted. Eliza finished rage building inside her. Theo died because of land development. Maya can't prove Harlan's involvement, Jackson cautioned, but she believes it's connected to everything happening now. Crawford's company has a pattern of eliminating obstacles, whether it's wild horses, environmental protections, or people who stand in their way. The implications staggered Eliza. For 5 years, she'd blamed herself for Theo's death. The possibility that it had been deliberately caused, that her brother had died for corporate profit, awakened something primal within her. "I need to speak with Maya," she said, her voice hardening with resolve. "I need to hear exactly what she saw." They continued through the forest, Eliza's mind churning with questions and rising anger. If what Jackson suggested was true, if Harlan had somehow spooked Monarch into killing Theo, then her years of self-imposed exile had been based on a lie. Her guilt, her isolation, her abandonment of the work she loved, all because someone had engineered a tragedy for financial gain. The thought was unbearable, yet it ignited a determination she hadn't felt in years. No longer was this just about saving a herd of wild horses. It was about justice for Theo. As the afternoon waned, Pinewood's lights appeared in the valley below them. They had nearly reached safety when Nova suddenly tensed, nickering a warning to Shadowwind. The stallion immediately moved in front of the humans, body alert, ears swiveling toward a sound Eliza couldn't yet hear. Then she heard it, a helicopter approaching from the east, flying low over the treetops. Crawford's private chopper. Jackson identified it, pulling Eliza toward the shelter of the trees. "They're sweeping the area." Joseph pointed to a dense thicket ahead. "That way. The trees will hide us." They ran for cover, Shadowwind and Nova vanishing into the forest, with the supernatural ability of wild creatures to disappear when threatened. The helicopter grew louder, searchlights cutting through the gathering dusk as it methodically scanned the mountainside. Huddled beneath the evergreen branches, they watched the aircraft pass overhead, its powerful lights illuminating the snow mere yards from their hiding place. For a terrible moment, Eliza thought they'd been spotted as the helicopter hovered, searchlight fixed on something nearby. Then gunshots rang out, 3 sharp cracks that echoed across the valley. "No!" Jackson gasped, lurching forward, only to be restrained by Joseph. "Stay hidden," the old man commanded. "Nothing you can do now." The helicopter's searchlight remained fixed on a point just beyond their thicket. More shots followed, then the aircraft banked away, continuing its search pattern further down the mountain. When it was gone, they emerged cautiously from hiding. Jackson immediately set off toward where the searchlight had focused, moving with reckless speed through the snow. "Jackson, wait!" Eliza called, hurrying after him. "It could be a trap." He either didn't hear or didn't care. When Eliza caught up to him, he stood motionless at the edge of a small clearing, staring down at a dark form in the snow. Nova lay on her side, blood staining the white ground beneath her. The beautiful bay mare's eyes were open, but dulling her breath, coming in shallow gasps. "They shot her from the air," Jackson said, voice hollow with shock. "Just gunned her down." Eliza knelt beside the dying horse professional assessment, telling her what her heart didn't want to accept. Nova's wounds were fatal. The mare had taken multiple bullets to her chest and neck. "I'm sorry," she whispered, gently stroking the mare's neck. "I'm so sorry." Nova's eyes found hers, holding a silent communication that transcended species. There was no fear in those eyes, only a quiet acceptance, and something like trust. Shadowwind appeared at the edge of the clearing, his posture conveying his distress. He approached slowly, nickering softly to his mate. The stallion's grief was palpable as he nuzzled Nova's face, standing guard over her in her final moments. Eliza moved back, giving the horses space for their goodbye. Jackson stood rigid beside her, tears freezing on his cheeks in the bitter cold. Joseph remained a respectful distance away, head bowed in silent prayer. Nova's breathing slowed, then stopped. Shadowwind threw his head back and bugled, a sound of such raw anguish that it pierced Eliza to her core. The stallion nudged his mate's still form once more, then turned to face the humans, his dark eyes now burning with what could only be described as fury. "They're killing them systematically," Jackson said, his voice trembling with rage and grief. "Destroying the herd one by one." Shadow Wind pawed the ground, snorting clouds of steam into the cold air. Then, with deliberate intent, he moved to Eliza's side and stood waiting his message clear time to act. Eliza placed her hand on the stallion's warm neck, feeling his strength flow into her. The hesitation and fear that had paralyzed her for 5 years dissolved in the face of Nova's senseless death and Shadow Wind's silent demand for justice. "We're going to stop them," she promised the silver stallion. "Whatever it takes." Joseph approached, his ancient eyes filled with wisdom and sorrow. "The spirit horses have chosen their warriors. Now we must honor their sacrifice." As darkness fell over the mountain, they continued their descent toward Pinewood, leaving Nova's body behind, but carrying her death as a burning coal of resolve. Shadow Wind stayed with them, no longer simply leading, but actively partnered in their mission. Eliza walked beside the stallion, her hand occasionally brushing his shoulder. Each touch strengthened her determination, reminding her of everything she had once been and might become again. By the time Pinewood's lights grew close enough to distinguish individual buildings, Eliza Morgan had shed the shell of isolation she'd worn for 5 years. In its place stood a woman reforged by grief and rage, ready to face not only the men who threatened the wild horses, but the ghosts of her own past. Shadow Wind seemed to sense the change in her. The stallion matched his pace to hers, two survivors walking side by side toward a confrontation that would determine the fate of the valley, and perhaps Eliza's soul. The lights of Pinewood glowed like fallen stars in the valley below, a beacon of civilization after days in the wilderness. Eliza Jackson and Joseph descended the final stretch of Mountain Trail Shadow Wind, a silver ghost moving silently beside them. Night had fully settled, the temperature plummeting as stars emerged in the clear sky. "We'll go to my store," Joseph said, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "Maya waits there. It's safer than the hotel or diner where Crawford's men might be watching." Eliza nodded, her mind still processing Nova's violent death. The image of the beautiful mare lying in blood-stained snow haunted her, fueling a determination that burned away exhaustion and doubt. "What about Shadow Wind?" she asked, glancing at the stallion who had stayed faithfully by her side. "He can't come into town." "The forest edges the back of my property," Joseph replied. "He can remain hidden there." As if understanding their conversation, Shadow Wind nickered softly, bumping his head against Eliza's shoulder. The gesture, so trusting from a wild creature, brought a lump to her throat. "I'll find you again," she promised him, quietly running her hand along his powerful neck. "Stay safe." The stallion stood watching as they continued down the trail, his dark eyes reflecting starlight. Only when they reached the first outlying buildings of Pinewood did he finally turn and vanish into the forest, a silver shadow melting into darkness. Joseph led them through back streets and alleyways, avoiding the main road where curious eyes might spot them. After 5 years of semi-regular supply runs, Eliza was known in Pinewood, but not well enough to explain her current disheveled state or her companions. Running Bear General Store stood dark and closed, a handwritten "Out Sick" sign hanging in the window. Joseph unlocked the back door, ushering them quickly inside before securing it behind them. The store's familiar scents, herbs, coffee, leather, and wood smoke, enveloped Eliza as Joseph led them through the storage room to his private quarters behind the shop. A small apartment, simply furnished but warm and inviting, with native artifacts and family photographs adorning the walls. Maya Crawford stood as they entered, relief washing over her face. At 24, she had grown from the shy teenager, Eliza remembered, into a poised young woman, though her dark eyes still held the same intensity. "Thank God," she breathed, rushing forward to embrace Jackson. "When you didn't come back, I feared the worst." "It was close," Jackson admitted, returning her hug briefly before stepping back. "Your father's men are hunting us." Maya's gaze shifted to Eliza, recognition and something like guilt flashing across her features. "Miss Morgan, it's been a long time." "Too long it seems," Eliza replied, studying the young woman who had once volunteered at her therapy center. The girl who, according to Jackson, had witnessed something crucial the day Theo died. Joseph moved to the kitchenette, putting a kettle on the stove. "Sit, eat, then we talk." They settled around the small table as Joseph laid out a simple meal of stew bread and hot tea. Eliza hadn't realized how hungry she was until the food appeared before her. They ate in silence, the simple act of filling their empty stomachs taking precedence over conversation. Only when the edge of hunger had been dulled did Maya speak again. The timeline has changed. My father's pushing the dam project through immediately. The construction crews arrive tomorrow to begin preliminary work. That's impossible, Jackson said, setting down his mug. The environmental impact statements haven't been finalized. The public comment period. All bypassed, Maya interrupted. Victor convinced my father that delaying further would only give environmental groups more time to organize opposition. They're using a regulatory loophole to classify it as an emergency infrastructure project. Emergency? Eliza scoffed. What emergency justifies destroying an entire ecosystem? Money, Joseph said simply. The investors are threatening to pull out if construction doesn't begin immediately. Maya nodded. My father's overextended on this project. If it fails, Westland development could collapse. Jackson leaned forward, intent. What about the evidence we've been gathering? The falsified environmental reports, the endangered species documentation. All gone, Maya said, her expression grim. Victor had your research cabin searched yesterday. They took everything. Your computer backup drives, field notes. Not everything, Jackson countered, his hand moving to an inner pocket of his jacket. He withdrew a small waterproof memory card. I keep the most crucial data with me. Encrypted copies of the falsified reports, photographs of the horse killings, GPS tracking data for the herd, showing their historical use of the valley. Hope flickered in Maya's eyes. That might be enough to get an emergency injunction if we can get it to the right people in time. We need more, Eliza said suddenly, all eyes turning to her. Technical data won't be enough to stop this. We need to make people care. How? Jackson asked. By telling the whole story, not just about the environmental impact, but about the corruption, the horse killings. Eliza paused, steeling herself. And about Theo. Maya paled visibly. Miss Morgan, Jackson told me you were there that day. Eliza said, her voice steady despite the emotional storm brewing inside her. That you saw Victor Harlan near the arena before Monarch panicked. Maya looked down at her hands, which had begun to tremble slightly. I wasn't sure at first. I only caught a glimpse of someone by the fence. It wasn't until I saw Victor working for my father months later that I recognized him. What exactly did you see? Eliza pressed. He was standing near the electrical panel that controlled the arena lights. I remember thinking it was odd because visitors weren't allowed in that area. Maya looked up, meeting Eliza's gaze directly. Just before Monarch panicked, there was a loud pop and the lights flickered. I always wondered if he did something to the electrical system, something that might have scared the horse. Eliza absorbed this information, mind racing. Monarch had been bomb-proof, unflappable, even during thunderstorms. But a sudden electrical surge near his head, perhaps creating a shock or spark, that might have triggered the panic that led to Theo's death. Why didn't you say something at the time? She asked, working to keep accusation from her tone. I was scared, Maya admitted, shame evident in her voice, and I wasn't certain. By the time I realized who he was and what might have happened, you had disappeared, the center had closed, and my father had purchased the adjacent property for development. Does your father know what Victor did? Jackson asked. I told him my suspicions 2 years ago. He dismissed them, said I was imagining things. Maya's expression hardened. That's when I started looking more closely at Westland's projects, finding the discrepancies in the environmental reports. Joseph, who had been listening silently, spoke up. The question now is not what happened in the past, but what we do tomorrow. Crawford's men will begin clearing the valley at dawn. We go to the authorities, Jackson suggested. The county sheriff, EPA, anyone who will listen. Sheriff Allen is in my father's pocket, Maya countered. And government agencies won't act without going through channels, which takes time we don't have. The press, then, Eliza proposed. Is there a journalist you trust, someone who would run with this story immediately? Maya considered this. Ben Whitaker at the Regional Tribune. He's been investigating my father's business practices for months. With concrete evidence, he might publish something that could force a delay. I can reach out to my contacts at the Sierra Club and Wilderness Society, Jackson added. If they mobilize their legal teams, we might get an emergency hearing. Joseph nodded approvingly. Good plans, but you forget one thing. The horses themselves. While you fight with words and laws, Crawford's men will continue hunting the herd. Joseph's right, Eliza said, her professional instincts awakening. The herd needs protection now. Shadow Wind can't defend them alone against armed men. What are you suggesting? Jackson asked. Eliza squared her shoulders, decision crystallizing in her mind. I'm going back to the valley, tonight. I'll do what I can to keep the horses safe until legal action can stop the project. That's too dangerous, Jackson objected. Harlan's men won't hesitate to shoot anyone interfering with the project. They've already killed Nova. I'm not asking permission, Eliza said firmly. Those horses need someone on their side, and right now that's me. Shadow Wind brought me into this for a reason. Maya studied Eliza with newfound respect. You're not what I expected. After all these years. What did you expect? Eliza asked. Someone broken. Someone still running from what happened. Maya offered a small smile. Instead, you're ready to run toward danger. Eliza thought of the past 5 years, the isolation and fear she'd wrapped around herself like armor. I was broken, maybe still am, but some things matter more than fear. Joseph stood decision made. We divide our forces. Jackson, you take the evidence to the newspaper and your environmental contacts. Maya, you return home to monitor your father's plans without raising suspicion. Eliza and I will go to the valley. You're coming with me? Eliza asked, surprised. The old man smiled, a warrior's light in his ancient eyes. Those mountains have been my home for 75 years. I know every trail, every hiding place, and I have friends who will help. Plans solidified quickly after that. Joseph gathered supplies, food, warm clothing, first aid equipment, and two-way radios with enough range to reach town. Maya downloaded Jackson's data and made copies for multiple recipients, a failsafe against interception. You should rest before leaving, Jackson told Eliza, concern evident in his voice. You've barely slept in days. I'll rest when the horses are safe, she replied, checking the supplies Joseph had given her. Jackson stepped closer, lowering his voice. I never thanked you properly for saving my life in that shelter. Shadow Wind saved us both, Eliza corrected. Yes, but you chose to help a stranger with a head wound and a suspicious photograph. Not everyone would have made that choice. His hazel eyes held hers. Whatever happens tomorrow, I'm grateful our paths crossed. The simple sincerity of his words caught Eliza off guard. For 5 years, she'd avoided genuine connection with anyone convinced she didn't deserve it after failing Theo. Yet here was Jackson Hayes looking at her with respect and something warmer despite knowing her at her worst. Be careful tomorrow, she said finally, allowing herself to acknowledge the connection that had formed between them. Those documents won't help anyone if you're caught with them. I could say the same to you. Harlan's men won't show mercy if they find you in that valley. Then I'd better not get caught. An hour before dawn, Eliza and Joseph slipped out the back door of the store. The night remained clear and bitterly cold stars brilliant overhead. They moved silently through the sleeping town, keeping to shadows until they reached the forest edge. A soft nicker greeted them. Shadow Wind emerged from the trees, his silver coat ghostly in the starlight. He approached Eliza without hesitation, lowering his head in greeting. He waited for you, Joseph observed, admiration in his voice. Spirit horse indeed. Eliza rested her forehead against Shadow Wind's drawing strength from the stallion's solid presence. We need to warn your family, she told him softly. Take us to them. The horse seemed to understand. He turned, pausing to ensure they followed, then set off into the forest at a pace the humans could match. Joseph moved with surprising agility for his age, navigating the difficult terrain without complaint. You've done this before, Eliza commented as they climbed. Joseph smiled faintly. Many times. My grandfather taught me to track and hunt in these mountains when I was younger than your brother was. The mention of Theo didn't bring the usual stab of pain. Instead, Eliza felt a quiet determination to honor his memory by preventing another senseless tragedy. Joseph, do you think Maya is right about Victor Harlan causing the accident that killed Theo? The old man was silent for several steps before answering. The spirits see what humans hide, but sometimes even they cannot prevent evil from finding its moment. That's not really an answer. No, Joseph agreed, but it is all I have. What matters now is not how your brother died, but how you choose to live in his memory. They continued in silence after that, conserving energy for the climb. As dawn lightened the eastern sky, they reached the ridge overlooking the hidden valley where the wild herd had sheltered. Shadow Wind halted suddenly, ears pricked forward. nostrils flaring. A low, warning rumble emerged from his chest. "Something's wrong," Eliza whispered instinctively, interpreting the stallion's body language. Joseph crouched, scanning the valley below. "There," he pointed, "at the far end." In the growing light, Eliza could make out vehicles. 3 large trucks and what appeared to be early construction equipment parked at the valley's entrance. Men moved around them, unloading gear. "They've started already," she breathed, horror rising. "But where are the horses?" As if in answer, Shadow Wind moved along the ridgeline, leading them to a better vantage point. From there, Eliza could see the herd gathered nervously in the center of the valley, clearly disturbed by the human activity, but unsure where to flee. "They're trapped," Joseph observed grimly. "Crawford's men have blocked the main exit routes." "Deliberately," Eliza realized. "They're containing the herd to eliminate them more efficiently." Shadow Wind pawed the ground, agitation evident in every line of his powerful body. He clearly understood the danger to his family, but was torn between returning to them and staying with Eliza. "We need to create a diversion," Eliza decided, mind racing through options. "Something to draw those men away, long enough for the herd to escape through the eastern pass." Joseph nodded, already reaching into his pack. "Fire," he said simply. "Not to harm the forest, but to create smoke confusion." "Will that work? The ground is covered in snow. Pine needles burn even in winter." Joseph produced a small bundle of what looked like kindling and a lighter. "I will create smoke on the western ridge. When the men investigate, you lead the horses east." "Me?" Eliza's eyes widened. "I can't control a wild herd." "You don't need to control them," Joseph said, nodding toward Shadow Wind. "He will. They trust him. He trusts you. It is enough." The plan was simple but dangerous. Joseph would create several small smoky fires along the western ridge, drawing attention and resources away from the valley floor. Meanwhile, Eliza and Shadow Wind would approach the herd from above the eastern pass, guiding them to safety once the way was clear. "If I don't return to town by nightfall, tell Jackson to proceed with the evidence regardless," Joseph instructed, handing Eliza one of the two-way radios. "The horses must be saved, but so must the valley itself." Eliza gripped the old man's arm. "Be careful, Joseph. These men have already killed once." His weathered face creased in a smile. "I have walked these mountains longer than Crawford has been alive. They will not catch this old fox today." They separated, Joseph moving west while Eliza and Shadow Wind circled toward the eastern pass. The stallion seemed to understand the plan, moving with deliberate quiet, despite his size, stopping frequently to assess their surroundings. Positioned above the eastern pass, Eliza could see the entire valley. The construction crew had grown, more men arriving in trucks. Some carried rifles, not standard equipment for construction workers. Harlan's security team, she guessed, disguised as laborers. The wild horses remained clustered near the center of the valley, too far from any exit to make a quick escape. Shadow Wind grew increasingly restless beside her, clearly wanting to return to his herd, but understanding the need to wait. "Soon," Eliza promised him, her hand on his neck. "Just a little longer." The radio at her hip crackled. "Ready," came Joseph's voice, barely audible. "Understood," she whispered in response. Minutes later, smoke began rising from 3 locations along the western ridge. At first, nothing happened. Then shouts erupted from the construction site as someone noticed the smoke. Men pointed, conferred briefly, then several trucks roared to life, heading toward the apparent threat. "Now," Eliza told Shadow Wind. The stallion needed no further encouragement. He bolted down the slope toward the valley floor, Eliza following as quickly as she could through the deep snow. Shadow Wind's powerful bugle echoed across the valley, a call his herd would recognize instantly. The wild horses responded immediately, heads rising in unison, bodies turning toward their returning leader. Shadow Wind reached them at a full gallop, circling the group once before positioning himself at their head, facing the eastern pass. By the time Eliza reached the valley floor, the herd was already moving, following Shadow Wind's lead. She positioned herself to the side, helping guide stragglers, young foals and their mothers, toward the exit. "That's it," she encouraged, falling into the familiar patterns of her previous work. "This way?" For a moment it seemed their plan would succeed without complication. The herd moved steadily toward freedom, the majority of Crawford's men still distracted by Joseph's diversion. Then an engine roared behind her. Eliza turned to see a single truck speeding across the valley, a man standing in the bed with a rifle raised. "No!" she screamed, waving her arms frantically to speed the horse's escape. The first shot rang out, kicking up snow near a fleeing mare. The horses panicked, their orderly movement dissolving into chaos. Some bolted toward the pass, while others scattered in different directions. Shadowwind reacted instantly. He charged directly at the oncoming truck, a silver missile aimed at the threat to his family. The driver swerved to avoid the stallion, the vehicle fishtailing in the snow before regaining traction. Eliza seized the opportunity to redirect the scattered horses, using her voice and body language to guide them toward the pass. Most responded to her calm authority, instinctively following her directions, even in their fear. The truck had circled back, but now faced a dilemma: pursue the escaping herd or deal with the aggressive stallion protecting their retreat. The gunman took aim at Shadowwind. Without thinking, Eliza sprinted toward the stallion, putting herself between him and the rifle. "Leave him alone!" she shouted, arms outstretched. The truck skidded to a halt 30 yards away. The gunman lowered his weapon, slightly clearly surprised to find a human in his sights. "Stand aside, lady," he called. "This doesn't concern you. These horses are protected." Eliza bluffed, standing her ground. "Federal law prohibits harming them." The man in the truck bed laughed. "Not anymore. We have permits to remove them. Now move or you'll get hurt." Shadowwind pawed the ground beside Eliza, his powerful body tensed for action. The remaining horses had nearly reached the pass, only a few stragglers still visible on the valley floor. "You're trespassing on Native American sacred land," Eliza countered, playing for time. "Joseph Running Bear has filed for emergency protection under the American Indian Religious Freedom Act." This gave the men pause. The driver leaned out his window, conferring with the gunman. Eliza seized the moment to signal Shadowwind, gesturing toward the last of the retreating herd. The stallion hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave her facing danger alone. "Go," she whispered urgently. "Lead them to safety. I'll follow." With a final look that seemed to penetrate her very soul, Shadowwind wheeled and galloped toward the eastern pass, catching up with the last of his herd as they disappeared into the forest beyond. The men in the truck noticed too late. "Damn it, they're getting away!" The gunman raised his rifle again, but the fleeing horses were already out of effective range. Eliza turned to follow, but the truck roared to life, cutting off her escape route. The vehicle skidded to a stop beside her, and the passenger door flew open. "Get in," ordered the driver, a heavyset man with cold eyes. "Harlan wants to talk to you." "I have nothing to say to Victor Harlan," Eliza replied, backing away. The gunman jumped from the truck bed, rifle aimed casually in her direction. "Wasn't a request, ma'am." Surrounded and with no immediate escape route, Eliza weighed her options. Fighting would be futile. Running would likely result in injury or worse. Her best chance was to comply temporarily while looking for an opportunity to break away. "Fine," she said, climbing reluctantly into the truck. "But you should know people are expecting me back in town. If I don't return, questions will be asked." The men exchanged glances but said nothing as they drove her across the valley toward the construction site. Eliza used the time to survey her surroundings, noting the positions of vehicles and personnel searching for potential escape routes. The construction site had been established at the valley's western end, where the planned dam would eventually rise. Temporary structures had already been erected: office trailers, equipment shelters, and what appeared to be a security checkpoint. The truck pulled up beside the largest trailer. "Out," ordered the driver. Inside, the trailer had been converted into a field office. Maps and blueprints covered one wall. A communications setup occupied another. At the center, behind a folding table serving as a desk, stood Victor Harlan. In his early 50s, Harlan had the hard physique of a career military man gone private sector. His close-cropped hair was steel gray, his eyes a cold blue that assessed Eliza with clinical detachment. "Miss Morgan," he greeted, her voice deceptively pleasant. "What an unexpected surprise. We were told you'd become something of a hermit these past 5 years." Eliza met his gaze directly, refusing to show fear. "And I was told you might be responsible for my brother's death, Mr. Harlan. I guess we're both full of surprises." If her accusation rattled him, he didn't show it. "An unfortunate accident, your brother. Tragic when the young die needlessly." The threat wasn't subtle. Eliza's hands clenched at her sides, but she maintained her composure. "Where's Joseph Running Bear?" The old man currently explaining to my men why he was setting fires on private property. Harlan gestured to a chair. Please sit. We have matters to discuss. Eliza remained standing. This isn't private property yet. The land acquisition depends on environmental approvals that haven't been granted. A technicality that's being resolved as we speak. Harlan's smile didn't reach his eyes. Now perhaps you can tell me where Jackson Hayes is hiding and what he's done with certain confidential company documents. I have no idea what you're talking about. Harlan sighed as if disappointed by her response. Miss Morgan, we know Hayes was with you. We know he has stolen proprietary information that could damage Westland development. Cooperate, tell us where to find him, and you can return to your isolated cabin, never to be bothered again. And if I don't cooperate, then things become considerably less pleasant. Harlan leaned forward. Let me be clear, this dam will be built. The wild horses will be removed. Nothing you Hayes or that meddling old Indian can do will change that. The only variable is how much you personally suffer in the process. Eliza's mind raced, calculating how much time had passed since the herd escaped. By now, Jackson should be meeting with the journalist. Maya would be monitoring her father's communications. If she could stall Harlan long enough. Why is this project so important that you're willing to threaten and kill for it? She asked, genuinely curious. It's just another luxury resort. Surely it's not worth criminal charges? Something flickered in Harlan's eyes, surprised that she was engaging rather than pleading. It's not about the resort, he admitted after a moment. It's what's underneath the valley. Underneath, rare earth minerals. Critical components for electronics, renewable energy technology, defense systems. Worth billions but currently impossible to extract due to environmental protections. Eliza understood suddenly. The dam is just a cover. Flood the valley, relocate. The horses eliminate the environmental concerns. Then discover the mineral deposits later and convert the resort to a mining operation. Harlan smiled thinly. Crawford is a visionary. He plays the long game. Does Maya know? Eliza asked, thinking of the young woman who believed she was fighting merely to protect wilderness. Crawford's daughter is idealistic but naive. She'll understand eventually that progress requires sacrifice. A commotion outside interrupted them, shouting the sound of vehicles arriving. Harlan moved to the window, frowning at whatever he saw. It appears we have visitors, he said, his pleasant demeanor evaporating. Stay put. The moment he left the trailer, Eliza moved quickly to the desk, searching for anything that might confirm what Harlan had just revealed. She found it in a geological survey marked confidential, detailed mappings of rare earth deposits throughout the valley with projected values in the billions. She folded the document and tucked it inside her jacket just as the trailer door burst open. Robert Crawford entered, followed closely by Harlan. At 65, Crawford remained imposing. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, despite the remote location. His face, handsome in a patrician way, was flushed with anger. What the hell is happening here, Victor? He demanded. I've got reporters at my office asking about illegal horse killings and falsified environmental reports. A situation we're handling, Harlan replied smoothly. Miss Morgan here was just about to tell us where Hayes is hiding with the stolen documents. Crawford seemed to notice Eliza for the first time. Recognition dawned in his eyes. Eliza Morgan, I remember you. You ran that horse therapy program. He frowned. What are you doing here? Trying to stop you from destroying the last wild horse herd in these mountains? She replied simply. The horses are being humanely relocated. Crawford said automatically, the practiced response of someone who had rehearsed for environmental objections. No harm will come to them? Eliza's anger flared. Tell that to the mayor your men shot from a helicopter yesterday, or the others found dead over the past months. Crawford's expression faltered, his gaze shifting to Harlan. What is she talking about, Victor? Before Harlan could respond, the trailer door opened again. Maya Crawford entered, followed by Jackson Hayes and, surprisingly, Sheriff Allen, Pinewood's law enforcement officer, whom Maya had earlier claimed was in Crawford's pocket. Dad, Maya said, her voice steady despite the tension radiating from her. You need to stop this. Now. Crawford's face darkened. Maya, I told you to stay in town. This is no place for you. I think it's exactly where I need to be. She gestured to the sheriff. I've shown Sheriff Allen the evidence of what's really happening here. The horse killings, the falsified reports, all of it. The sheriff, a weathered man in his 60s, nodded grimly. Mr. Crawford, I've known you 20 years, supported your projects. But if what your daughter's shown me is true, I can't look the other way. This is absurd, Harlan cut in. Whatever evidence they've presented is fabricated. Hayes stole company property, doctored documents. I recorded you, Victor. Maya interrupted, holding up her phone. Last week when you were discussing the removal of the horses, and I found your payment records to the men who've been killing them. Crawford's face had gone pale. Maya, whatever you think you know, I know everything, Dad. About the rare earth minerals, the real reason for the dam. About how you and Victor have been bribing officials, falsifying reports. Maya's voice broke slightly. And I know about Theo Morgan. The name hung in the air like a thunderclap. Eliza felt her heart rate accelerate as all eyes turned toward her. What about her brother? Crawford asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Victor arranged the accident, Maya said quietly. He tampered with the electrical system during the therapy session, knowing it would spook the horse. I saw him there, Dad. I told you 2 years ago, but you dismissed me. Crawford turned to Harlan, disbelief written across his features. Victor, is this true? Harlan's expression hardened. The therapy center was blocking acquisition of adjacent properties critical to the mineral rights. Its zoning protection had to be eliminated. So you killed a 17-year-old boy. Crawford's voice rose in shock. I created an incident, Harlan corrected coldly. The boy's death was unfortunate, but not the intended outcome. The goal was to discredit the center, force it to close. Eliza felt as if the ground had dropped from beneath her feet. After 5 years of blaming herself, of carrying the crushing weight of guilt for Theo's death, to hear it discussed so callously as an incident, a deliberate act to serve corporate interests, was almost unbearable. You destroyed my life, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, for land rights. Business requires difficult decisions, Harlan replied without remorse. Sacrifices for the greater good. There's nothing good about what you've done, Sheriff Allen said, stepping forward. Victor Harlan, you're under arrest for the suspicious death of Theodore Morgan, animal cruelty, and environmental violations. Harlan's hand moved toward his jacket, but Jackson was faster, stepping between the security chief and the others. Don't, he warned. It's over, Victor. For a tense moment it seemed Harlan might resist. Then his shoulders slumped slightly, a calculating look entering his eyes. Robert gave the orders, he said. Everything I did was with his full knowledge and approval. That's a lie, Crawford exclaimed. I never authorized any of this. The horse killings, tampering with the therapy session. Never. Your signature is on the documents, Harlan countered. Your company profited. You think you're not implicated? As the men argued, Eliza caught Maya's eye. The younger woman moved to her side, speaking softly. Joseph is safe. He's leading the federal wildlife officers to where the horse carcasses were dumped. They're already serving injunctions to stop all construction. Relief washed over Eliza. And the herd, safe for now. The Eastern Pass leads to protected federal land. They can't touch the horses there without additional permits, which they won't get now that the evidence is public. Sheriff Allen was handcuffing Harlan, reciting his rights. 2 deputies had arrived and were securing the construction site. Crawford stood apart, the empire he'd built crumbling around him, his daughter's evidence ensuring that even if he avoided criminal charges, his company would never recover from the scandal. I need to find Shadowin, Eliza said suddenly, the need to confirm the stallion's safety overwhelming. And Joseph. Jackson joined them, his expression grim but satisfied. The press is already running the story, regional and national outlets. The dam project is finished. Nash and the horses, Eliza pressed. Federal protection is being expedited based on the evidence of historical significance in the attempted illegal removal. It will take time to formalize, but for now they're safe. Eliza nodded, processing everything that had happened. The truth about Theo's death had been revealed, justice was being served, the wild horses saved, yet she felt strangely hollow, as if expecting a sense of closure that hadn't quite arrived. I need some air, she said, moving toward the door. Outside, the valley lay peaceful in the afternoon sunlight, the chaos of the morning giving way to the methodical process of law enforcement documenting the scene. Eliza walked away from the activity seeking silence to process her tumultuous emotions. She found herself drawn to the eastern pass where the herd had escaped. Standing at the entrance, she gazed into the forest beyond, wondering where Shadowwind had led his family if they were truly safe now. The sound of hoofbeats made her turn. There emerging from the trees came Shadowwind. Alone without his herd, the silver stallion approached her with deliberate steps. "You came back," Eliza whispered, tears suddenly blurring her vision. The stallion stopped before her, lowering his head to touch his forehead to hers. The same gesture of connection he had offered in the cave. Eliza's arms encircled his neck, her fingers tangling in his mane as emotion finally broke through the numbness. She wept, for Theo, for the lost years, for the pain she'd carried so long. Shadowwind stood motionless, solid and warm against her, offering silent comfort as she released 5 years of pent-up grief. When her tears finally subsided, Eliza stepped back, wiping her eyes. "Thank you," she told the stallion, meaning it on levels beyond words. "For everything." Shadowwind nickered softly, then turned his head, looking deeper into the forest. Following his gaze, Eliza saw movement among the trees. Joseph Running Bear walking toward them with unhurried steps. "The herd is safe," the old man announced as he approached. "They've found good grazing 2 valleys over. Protected land." "You're not with the wildlife officers?" Eliza asked. Joseph smiled slightly. "My part was done when they found what they needed. The spirits called me here instead." Shadowwind moved to greet Joseph, allowing the old man to touch his neck briefly before returning to Eliza's side. "He has chosen you," Joseph observed. "Rare for a wild one to bond so strongly with a human." "I can't keep him," Eliza said, though the thought of parting from Shadowwind brought unexpected pain. "He belongs with his herd, wild and free. Perhaps, or perhaps his purpose now lies elsewhere." Joseph's ancient eyes held wisdom accumulated over decades. The horse people have always served as messengers between worlds, wild and tame, past and future, death and life. Eliza considered this, her hand resting on Shadowwind's warm neck. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted. "For 5 years I've just existed. I'm not sure I remember how to actually live." "The path reveals itself one step at a time," Joseph said simply, "but it rarely leads backward." The sound of approaching footsteps made them turn. Jackson and Maya were walking toward them, their expressions lightening at the sight of Shadowwind. "He came back," Jackson said, smiling despite his exhaustion. "He never really left," Eliza replied, understanding flowing between her and the stallion. "He was watching over all of us." Maya hung back, slightly uncertainty in her posture. "Miss Morgan, Eliza, I want to apologize for not speaking up sooner about what I saw that day. Maybe if I had—" "You were 19, Maya, unsure of what you'd seen." Eliza approached the younger woman, taking her hands. "What matters is that you found the courage to speak up now, when it mattered most." "My father," Maya's voice faltered. "He claims he didn't know what Victor was doing, but he must have suspected something. The property acquisitions after your center closed were too convenient." "People believe what they want to believe," Eliza said gently, "especially when the truth is uncomfortable." Jackson joined them, his hazel eyes meeting Eliza's. "The federal agents want statements from all of us. It's going to be a long process. Investigations, possibly trials." "I'll do whatever's needed," Eliza assured him. "No more running away." Shadowwind whinnied softly, drawing their attention. The stallion had moved several paces toward the forest, then stopped, looking back at Eliza expectantly. "I think he wants you to follow him," Joseph observed. Eliza hesitated only briefly. "I'll be back," she told the others, then fell into step behind the silver stallion. Shadowwind led her along a narrow trail into the forest, moving with purpose. After 10 minutes of walking, they emerged into a small clearing where, to Eliza's surprise, the entire wild herd waited. Mares, foals, young stallions, all standing quietly as if expecting her arrival. In the center of the clearing stood a small stone formation, weathered by centuries of Montana seasons. Joseph had mentioned sacred ground places where his ancestors had communed with the spirits of the land and its creatures. Shadowwind moved to the stone, then looked back at Eliza, waiting. Understanding intuitively what was being offered, Eliza approached the ancient site. As she placed her hand on the cool stone, a sense of peace washed over her, deeper and more profound than anything she'd experienced since Theo's death. For a moment, just a moment, she felt her brother's presence, not as a ghost or vision, but as a certainty that he was at peace, that he understood, that he forgave, that he wanted her to live fully again. "I miss you every day," she whispered to the empty air. "I always will, but I think it's time I stopped hiding." Shadow Wind approached, standing beside her at the stones. The rest of the herd began to move, circling the clearing in a slow, deliberate pattern that seemed almost ceremonial. Eliza remained still at the center of this extraordinary moment, feeling the weight of the past 5 years gradually lifting from her shoulders. Not gone completely, she would always carry Thea with her, but transformed into something she could bear without being crushed by it. When the herd finally stopped their circling, Shadowwind moved away from Eliza, rejoining his family. He looked back once more, dark eyes meeting hers across the clearing, before leading the horses deeper into the forest, disappearing among the trees. Eliza stood alone in the sacred space, tears on her cheeks, but a lightness in her heart that had been absent for too long. She understood now why Shadowwind had found her, why he had led her through darkness, back toward light. Some wounds never fully heal, but they can transform us if we let them. Spring came early to the Montana mountains that year. Snow melted from the valley's wildflowers, carpeted meadows and creeks ran full with snowmelt. In the hidden valley that had nearly become a dam reservoir, nature reclaimed the abandoned construction site, erasing the brief human intrusion. On a sunlit afternoon in May, Eliza Morgan stood on the porch of a newly constructed cabin at the edge of what was now officially designated as the Theo Morgan Wild Horse Preserve. The simple structure served dual purposes: research station for ongoing documentation of the herd and headquarters for the revived equine therapy program she had recently reestablished. 6 months had brought tremendous change. Victor Harlan faced multiple charges, including negligent homicide in Theo's death. Robert Crawford had avoided criminal prosecution by cooperating fully with authorities, though his company had collapsed under the weight of scandal and financial penalties. Maya now worked alongside Eliza at the preserve, her environmental science degree proving invaluable in their conservation efforts. Jackson Hayes approached from the research building nearby, his face tanned from days spent in the field. Their relationship had evolved cautiously over the months. Colleagues first, then friends, and recently something more, still tender and new, but built on solid foundation of shared purpose and mutual respect. "The new group arrives tomorrow," he reminded her, joining her on the porch. "6 children from the Blackfeet Reservation. Joseph says they're excited." Eliza smiled, watching a young therapy horse grazing in the paddock. Not wild like Shadowwind's herd, but specially trained for working with traumatized children. "I think we're ready for them." In the distance, movement caught her eye. Horses appearing at the edge of the forest. The wild herd often came to the boundaries of their territory, visible, but maintaining their freedom. At their head rode a silver stallion, his coat gleaming in the spring sunshine. Shadowwind had visited regularly over the months, sometimes alone, sometimes with his family, maintaining the connection that had formed during those winter days of danger and discovery. "He still comes to see you," Jackson observed, smiling. "He comes to check on all of us," Eliza corrected, "making sure we're keeping our promises." Together, they watched as Shadowwind led his herd along the preserve boundary. The stallion paused, looking directly toward the cabin where Eliza stood. Even across the distance, she felt the connection between them, not one of ownership or control, but of mutual respect and understanding. Shadowwind raised his head and bugled, the sound echoing across the valley. Not a call of alarm or dominance, but something that sounded remarkably like joy. Then he wheeled, leading his family back into the wild forests that were now their protected home. Eliza's hand found Jackson's, their fingers intertwining, as they watched the wild horses disappear into the trees. The pain of the past would always be with her, but it no longer defined her. Like the land itself, she had weathered storms and emerged renewed, finding purpose in protecting what mattered most. Shadowwind had called her back from isolation, back to life and connection. And in answering that call, Eliza Morgan had finally found her way home. The mountains stand eternal witnesses to our briefest moments of courage and despair. They watched as Shadowwind led Eliza from darkness back into light, as winter's grip slowly released into spring's gentle promise. We all carry wounds, some visible, some hidden, beneath careful smiles. Eliza's journey reminds us that healing rarely comes from isolation, but from the courage to connect again, to trust despite betrayal, to love despite loss. In the end, perhaps, we are not so different from the wild horses that roam these valleys. We seek freedom, yet yearn for connection. We run from pain, yet are defined by how we face it. Shadow Wind remains where he belongs, wild, free, untamed. But the bridge he built between worlds remains a testament to mysteries we may never fully understand. What calls to you from the edge of your darkest forest? What silver messenger waits in the shadows of your own winter? Sometimes the most profound healing begins with the simple courage to follow, when called to trust what we cannot explain, to believe that even our deepest wounds can transform from scars of sorrow into marks of strength. For in the quiet moments between heartbeats, in the spaces between words, in the silence before dawn, this is where we find our way home.